Hello, Kirana, and welcome to CookieCast, the podcast that's all about the Cook Islands. This is the place to meet people who have their own insight into this Polynesian paradise in the South Pacific. I'm John Roberts, and this edition is all about Palmerston. 500 kilometres northwest of Rarotonga, it's one of the most isolated islands in the world, with a unique story to tell. Palmerston is almost dead centre of the South Pacific, and it's the only one of the Cook Islands Captain Cook set foot on himself. It wasn't even correctly positioned on maps until 1969, when a geographical survey established it was actually 14 kilometres away from where everyone thought it was, because that's where Cook had drawn it 200 years earlier. But the real story of this island is about an Englishman called William Masters, who established a dynasty there in the 19th century with the help of multiple wives and lots of children. And although it's part of the Cook Islands, William's descendants, by law, own the island in perpetuity. I'm taking a closer look at Palmerston with the help of Stella Neal, a direct descendant of William, and one of just a handful of people who live on this remote atoll. Kia ora, Stella.
Kia ora, John.
So, a unique island among the Cooks, but how would you describe it?
It's quiet and slow, and at times you don't feel time passing. When I retired, I realized that city life no longer really appealed, and I miss the slow pace and the readily available coconut. Very, very practical reason. I wanted to be able to drink a coconut when I felt like it and walk down to the beach when I wanted to and felt like it, and just be in this place that had so many memories for me.
Let's talk about your ancestor, Palmerston's founding father, William Masters. I've got an account here of a meeting he had with the English missionary William Wyatt Gill. Gill compared him to Alexander Selkirk, the man who inspired the famous novel Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Monarch of all he surveys, his right there is none to dispute. That's what Gill said. What do you know of William?
He was an ordinary person from a Midlands, England town that found his way to the South Pacific. And I think who he is was a mix of characters and personalities, because his word was law on Palmerston. And basically he wed and divorced, and he ran the island with a firm hand. And from what my mother said and what her grandmother said or told her, William Masters was the authority figure on the island. And I think when I consider who and what he was like, he must have been quite a character, because to have successfully established a family dynasty and to maintain the control over how people behaved and the rules that were put in place on the island must have taken a certain strength of character. And I think that strength of character was imbued in my mother's parents and grandparents, and is what has contributed to the island surviving until now.
Do you feel a sense of history that, or indeed do others who live on the island feel that sense of history, that connection to William?
I don't know, but I know there is a certain sense of in William Masters that he is our ancestor. In a way, he was a little bit of a rogue as well. And I think that maybe you have to have a little bit of that in yourself to successfully do what he did.
Not only strong in character, but strong in body too. He built a house for his growing family from shipwrecked timbers, so robust that it's still standing today after more than 150 years. Can you tell me more about it?
Yes, it's it's a constant view that dominates the road. And when you come up from the beach and you enter into what we call the road, which is the strip of cleared land that extends from the lagoon side on the east and to the ocean side on the west. That's like the main street. And you see William Masters' house. The roof is rusting and the timber itself is starting to show signs of wood rot from wood borer worm, but it's still standing strong. And when I was 7 years old, I could crawl in, stooped over and almost stand upright. But today you can't do that because of the amount of sand that has washed up over successive years of inundation from when there's been cyclones and the waves have come in as far as the main road. It's now called the Tin House. It's not called Father's House. William Masters is referred to by our people and my mother and her sister, whom I call Big Mama. They refer to William Masters as father, and his son, William Masters Jr., was Papa Oldman. And the house he lived in, that William Masters lived in, was called a tin house. So to this day, that house is still called a tin house. The timber that was used to build it was from the shipwreck. The cargo that that ship was carrying was timber that was for building a railroad, I understand, in Australia. And William Masters didn't have the means to mill the timber. And so it was used as it was, which was thick, wide timber and bolted in place. And when I was a child, the house was open. And I remember there were dances held in the house and gatherings. But when I returned to Palmerston 87, it was no longer used as that. And the house is said to belong to William Masters' son, Joel, and his descendants who are now living in Aitutaki. And so the family members on Palmerston, one of the families, are the caretaker of the house. So it's usually kept locked.
And right next to the house is the island's church. William built the first one, but I think this is a much more recent replacement, isn't it?
The church was replaced in the late 80s. The original church was built also from driftwood and shipwrecks, and it was a wooden structure. And in fact, the church during two cyclones in 1926 and 1932 was moved by the waves off its pilings, and the people rolled it back onto its piling, which is an amazing feat. And when I came home in 1987 for a visit, there were timber props holding the church up, and it was slightly skewed off center from the winds and the cyclones that had followed after the 1932. So it was quite a comical sight almost to see this old wooden building with these timber angles holding it in its place. And so the new church building is built of brick blocks, cinder blocks, and timber, but built to the same exact size as the previous church was built. And today, church service is only in the morning service, and then on other special days where a service would be held. So like Christmas, New Year's Day, Easter Easter, Good Friday. Even on the Duke's Day, there is a church service held to commemorate the day.
I'm glad you mentioned Duke's Day because I was going to ask you about that. It's a public holiday unique to Palmerston, and the Duke in question is His late Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, who was the husband of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. He visited Palmerston back in 1971, and I think I'm right in saying islanders feel they have a special relationship, even a direct link with the British royal family.
Well, this takes us back to what my mother told me, that in Palmerston, people considered themselves to be related to the royal family and felt that Prince Philip coming here was evidence of that relationship and kinship, because Prince Philip, who was accompanied by his uncle, Lord Mountbatten, said in their welcome that Palmerston people were his people. And so that was repeated. But we know that when the Britannia, the royal yacht at the time, prior to Prince Philip's visit to Palmerston, the Britannia had come several times to the South Pacific, and each time had called into Palmerston and was the only island in the Cook Islands to which it called in. And people were invited aboard.
Didn't Prince Philip swim in a pool on Palmerston, which I've heard is called Duke's Pool?
Yes, it's a area where the water is the sea, the lagoon is quite deep, quite very close to shore, and its name normally is called Vailai. And then after he came and he swam there, it was then called the Duke's Pool. So the two names are used interchangeably.
And is it a good swimming spot?
It was until recent times, because Palmerston exports parrotfish fillets to Rarotonga. And then what started happening, because the carcass of the fish, when it was filleted, was thrown into open pits and covered with sand, which brought flies. And so what started to happen was that the carcasses were thrown into the lagoon, initially out further in the lagoon, but in more recent times were just dumped close to shore. And on that side, it was dumped in and around the Waialae area. So now sharks swim in those areas where historically they didn't come that close to shore, and you could swim quite safely and usually there. So when I was last here in 2016 and 2017, I could swim quite safely in the Vailai Duke's Pool, but I wouldn't dare today.
Because of the sharks.
Yes. And when I returned home and went for a walk around the island, my niece she said to me, "Watch this." And she picked up a stone and she threw it into the water close to where the Duke's Pool is. And then all of a sudden there was a flurry of sharks, because they think that what's been thrown in there is food.
Let's continue our tour round the island. What other buildings might we see?
Next to the church is a large structure, which is the water catchment, and it was built to house the emergency water supply for the island, which is two large tanks built out of concrete, and the roof catches the water and it runs into these concrete tanks. And now, for the life of me, I can't remember how many thousand liters it holds, but it would be enough if we needed water for at least a week.
What about the school? There's a school on the island, the Lucky School.
Yes, it's further inland. It would be about maybe 150 meters inland, so you can't see it from the village. You have to go down a path, and then along what's called a school road, and it's in the southern part of the island, close to the southernmost beach of Palmerston. The school was originally at the eastern end of what is the road in the village, and then it was moved inland because of the cyclones. And in fact, when I came home in '87, I came home for 2 weeks, and I was asked to be the teacher on traveling on the same ship I was on was the Minister of Health and Education and the supervisor for the outer islands. And they learned on the wharf before leaving Rarotonga that the school was closed and a teacher had come to Rarotonga to have a baby. And so they asked me to be the teacher, and I was protesting, saying that, I'm a nurse. I trained to be a nurse. And I'll never forget the conversation. The minister said to me, "Well, you've been to university, haven't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you can teach."
See, you're a woman of many talents, Stella.
And he said to me, "She's going to be back. It'll be just for a month, and she'll be back on the next boat." And I had actually come to Palmerston to see my mother. Well, the teacher didn't come back for 6 months.
So how many children go to this school? Are there many children on the island?
Well, when I was the teacher, there were 18 children. And when I came home as a nurse in 2011, there were 25 children. And today, there are only 7, from 4 to 18.
Where do people live? Where are the homes on the island?
Most of the homes are in the village, the town area. So when you walk between the church and the water catchment, the first house to your left is Grandpa Ned's house. And Grandpa Ned was the son of William Masters Jr. And opposite Grandpa Ned is the middle family, Akakaingaro family cemetery, where William Masters is buried. So you would see William Masters' grave off to your left, and his wife, Akakaingaro, or Sarah, was her English given name, and their children and grandchildren. And then when you go further in is Grandpa Ned's son's house, and to the right of that is our family home. And then if you were to go back to the road and turn to your right, which would be the western side of the island, that's the Makavia family. And so there is Grandpa Bob's house, and Grandpa Bob was the grandson of Makavia, the second wife of William Masters. And Grandpa Bob's grandson, Bob Jr., is the mayor on Palmerston today. But if you were to turn to your left, opposite the church, is the house that belongs to my mother's sister, Mama Aka, and her family. And that house is painted blue. So it's usually referred to as Blue House. And they're on the beach side of the Te family. And the last house you would see, which is opposite the church, was the house built for William Masters Jr. by his son, Tiraya. And unfortunately, it is in ruins now and decaying, which is very sad because it was a beautifully built house when I was a child. There's no more of their family here on Palmerston to maintain it.
From the pictures I've seen of Palmerston, there also appears to be a very green area. What's that?
Further inland, past Grandpa Ned's house and his house, you come to what we call the patch. And the patch is pits that were dug by my mother's generation and her parents' generation, and the people that were here working on Palmerston to make copra. And in the patch is a species similar to taro, which we call puraka, a root crop with large elephant-type leaves. And beyond that is is what's called Refuge Hill, the clinic, and the emergency shelter.
So you've got the Paraka patch. There's obviously the sea has an abundance of life in it. How do you manage for fresh food? Is it all very much self-sustaining, that it is you're living off the land and the sea?
Yes and no. The majority of our food we bring in from Rarotonga, and then that's supplemented by what is grown on the island. So puraka is very rarely eaten today, but we also have breadfruit trees, which is used, and the breadfruit trees grow in the different sides of the different family lands boundaries, and we are dependent on the inter-island cargo ship, which used to come more frequently, but now it's only every 3 months, 3 to 4 months. And so you bulk buy to last for those 3 months. And flour, rice, sugar, the staples, and then frozen foods like beef and chicken, frozen chicken.
Things must run out.
Yes, very close to it. I arrived here in October, and my cousins in January told me that they were running very low and very short of rice and flour and probably would not last. And so what happens is when they're running close to having nothing left is they then would eat more frequently of what's grown on the island. But I don't know that they have run out completely to the point where they would have nothing. But it has run close to the bottom.
Stella, how do you spend your day?
Well, today I'm working full time as the administrator called the executive officer. The executive officer is essentially the administrator for the island. The executive officer is responsible for the delivery of infrastructure services, managing the island budget, operational budget for the island that's set by the government, and is a point of contact for official duties or official information that's needed to be disseminated. So I get up and go to work now, and I work late
What you left New Zealand to
into
escape?
the evening. What I was wanting to escape up until that, I was pretty much just almost vegetating because I wanted to just not have to do anything because I had worked for 45 years as a nurse. So I was enjoying my time of doing nothing or doing as I chose. And for most people on the island, it's food preparation and keeping the island tidy. So collecting the fallen branches, coconuts, and home and maintenance, maintaining, repairing the nets, and different things like that.
You keep talking about Palmerston as home, and obviously that's where your roots are. What, in your view, makes it so special?
Someone once asked me that some years ago, and I called it my heart place. And I think that's about the best way I can describe it. And and the longer I was away as I grew older, the more the pull to go home became. My mother, she left Palmerston when she was 18 to go work to help support her family, but she always returned. And even when we moved to New Zealand, when I was 14 for school, she would come home. It would be every couple of years she would come home. And then she finally returned to live in 1997, she packed up and returned home. And I remember being upset with her about coming home because she was going to be so far away from me and it would be difficult to see her. And she said, if you want to see me, come home. And I've done the same thing to my children, because of this call to be home.
Do you feel it is somewhere different from anywhere else in the world, somewhere very special?
Yes, yes, it has a pace and a rhythm that I think is the way we are meant to live without the frenzy rush of the modern world. And it was that frenzied rush that I felt and I feel when I'm in New Zealand that I no longer want to have or feel or experience. That makes me want to leave again.
Many thanks, Stella, for sharing what you so beautifully called your heart place.
You're welcome.
Stella Neal, speaking to me from Palmerston. I'm John Roberts. Thank you for listening, and join me again soon for more chats with those who have their own insight into the Cook Islands. That's CookieCast.